Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you've been watching the markets lately, you've probably felt the tension. Today, we're not just going to sit here and debate whether AI is a bubble. We are going to completely dismantle the 2026 AI market. We're going to uncover the invisible mechanics driving what is, honestly, the most expensive economic experiment in modern history. We'll map out exactly how this massive build-out is being funded, where the leverage is quietly hiding, and what history tells us is going to happen next. Let's get right into it.
Let's actually kick things off with an absolutely mind-bending contradiction from Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI. Picture this, right? You're sitting at a dimly lit restaurant, and Sam Altman, the guy whose company just closed the largest private fundraiser in human history, looks you dead in the eye and says, on the record, someone is going to lose a phenomenal amount of money. I mean, wow. He is openly warning us about a massive impending loss in the exact same industry that he is leading.
And what's genuinely absurd here? He made that admission while simultaneously signing infrastructure contracts worth over $1.5 trillion. Trillion, with a T. And he's doing this while OpenAI's projected losses are ballooning to $14 billion. That's nearly triple the year before. It's the ultimate contradiction, isn't it? A company bleeding historic amounts of cash is casually signing trillion-dollar contracts, all while its own CEO warns of a catastrophic financial wipeout. So let's look at Section 1. The core contradiction, yelling past each other. To understand why this wild disconnect is happening, we first have to realize that the market is just arguing over the wrong question. The awkward truth here is that both the bulls and the bears are absolutely right. Why? Because they're using totally different definitions. The bulls, well, they look for a lack of revenue, and since AI is undeniably generating massive enterprise cloud contracts, they say, nope, not a bubble. The bears, on the other hand, look at irrational capital allocation and these dangerous financing loops, and they see giant red flags everywhere. But here's the secret of economic history. Every single major technological bubble is simultaneously a financial disaster and a genuine revolution. The two just aren't mutually exclusive.
Moving on to Section 2, the bull case for AI.
All right, before we just tear into the risks, we need to step into the shoes of the smart money for a second. The bulls correctly point out that this isn't exactly the dot-com era all over again. Today's build-out is actually largely funded by the operating cash flows of some of the most cash-rich companies in human history. Think Microsoft, Google, and they're booking immense cloud backlogs. Plus, S&P earnings growth hit a staggering 27.1% in the first quarter of 2026, driven almost entirely by AI. Add to that the fact that per-task AI energy costs are falling rapidly, and governments are stepping in. They're treating domestic AI computers as critical national security infrastructure, which basically creates a massive geopolitical price floor.
And to put things into perspective, AI capital expenditure right now equates to just 0.8% of US GDP. When you compare that tiny fraction to the 6% of GDP we saw during the 1870s Railroad Mania, well, the bulls argue that this is just a massive but completely rational infrastructure build-out, not some historical mania. Which brings us to Section 3. Hidden leverage and circular money.
But as we peel back the layers, that really comforting funded by cash flow narrative, it kind of starts to fall apart. The first major crack is right in the projections. For the major hyperscalers, capital expenditure is projected to grow at roughly 80%, while their revenue growth is hovering around just 15.5%. So spending is going 5 times faster than revenue. And when that happens, free cash flow shrinks, which means all that marginal financing, it has to be coming from somewhere else. So where exactly is that money coming from? Well, instead of the big traditional banks, the risk is quietly bleeding out into private credit funds and neoclouds, like CoreWeave, for example, who are borrowing heavily against depreciating GPU contracts. It's effectively a massive, totally untested shadow banking system. And the hyperscalers themselves, they're issuing tens of billions in bonds and using these special financing vehicles. This kind of leverage isn't going to blow up in a sudden 2008-style weekend crash. No, it's going to be a slow-motion unwind, quietly buried in the footnotes of corporate filings.
Now, we are seeing a circular financing loop here that is literally terrifying economists. Think about how this works. Nvidia invests $100 billion into OpenAI. OpenAI then takes that exact money and gives it to Oracle to pay for data centers. Then Oracle takes that same money and hands it right back to Nvidia to buy more chips. Nvidia books that as record revenue, their stock price goes to the moon, and the wheel just spins again. We are talking about over $800 billion just sloshing around this ecosystem, artificially inflating revenues and stock prices all at once.
We are actually seeing the exact mathematical equivalent of the 1999 Lucent Technologies collapse. Back in the day, Lucent used $15 billion in vendor financing to artificially prop up their own customers. That inflated Lucent's own revenue right up until those customers defaulted and the whole house of cards came crashing down. Today, we're seeing tech giants aggressively co-investing with their largest, completely unprofitable AI customers. The loop works beautifully, right up until that central customer just can't pay. And if we stop and look at the actual economic output, the productivity data really doesn't justify these trillion-dollar valuations either. According to PwC, nearly 3/4 of all AI economic value is currently being hoarded by just 20% of organizations. As for the other 80%, they're basically stuck in pilot purgatory, building little internal chatbots that nobody actually uses. While all this investment is artificially spiking our current GDP numbers, some of the most credible economic models out there, like the Penn-Wharton budget model, are projecting an incredibly modest long-term effect. They estimate the permanent structural economic lift from AI will be less than 0.04 percentage points per year. Just think about that math for a second. We have literally trillions of dollars in capital expenditure chasing a tiny fraction of a percent of permanent annual productivity gain. All right, moving to section 4, the real bottleneck, electricity. So the finances are incredibly shaky, for sure. But the thing that will actually break this industry, it isn't a lack of capital, and it isn't a software issue. It is a fundamental lack of electricity. Get this. A single AI inference task, literally just typing one query into a large language model, can consume up to 1,000 times more electricity than a traditional Google search. That is 3 orders of magnitude more power just for one single prompt. Because of that insane usage, data center power demand is growing at 17% right now. That is roughly 6 times faster than the entire planet's overall power demand growth, which sits at just 3%. The grid simply cannot keep up. We have literally reached a point where data centers aren't just customers of the electricity grid anymore. They've transitioned into direct competitors, fighting everyday citizens for basic power. This hard physical limitation is forcing tech giants into a new model that people are calling bring your own power. Hyperscalers are quite literally building their own power plants just so they can plug their chips in. They're out there funding natural gas generation, they're committing to 45 gigawatts of nuclear small modular reactors, and they're building massive private microgrids. What started out as a sleek software boom has completely morphed into a massive, slow-moving industrial bottleneck. And that leads us to our final section, section 5, the railway lesson. To really synthesize what this all means for you, we have to look back at how history actually treats these massive infrastructure buildouts. Because there is a golden rule of technological revolutions. In the 1840s Railway Mania, the investors went completely bankrupt, but the physical tracks remained. In the 1999 dot-com crash, telecom equity was totally destroyed, but the fiber optic cables stayed in the ground to power the modern internet we use today. Fast forward to 2026. The AI bubble absolutely risks wiping out equity, but the massive power grids, the cooling systems, and those giant data centers, they're going to persist. The equity usually dies, but the physical infrastructure persists for the survivors to buy up at pennies on the dollar. So here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. AI is a genuine general-purpose technology. It really will permanently change the economy. However, the current financial structure built on top of it is undeniably a bubble. But the physical infrastructure being built right now is going to outlast the specific companies that end up going bankrupt. Therefore, your smartest move isn't arguing on the internet about whether to buy or sell the hype. It's recognizing that the real lasting value here lies in the physical picks and shovels. We're talking about things like power generation, raw copper, and utility transformers. Which brings us to our final, somewhat unsettling thought for today. Ultimately, this unprecedented trillion-dollar bubble is far less likely to be popped by some dramatic Wall Street panic, and far more likely to be popped by a localized utility shortage. The ceiling on AI growth is no longer a software problem, it's an industrial one. It leaves us all to wonder, when a lack of electricity forces the smartest companies on Earth to finally cut their spending, just how close are we to hitting that absolute physical limit? Keep a very close eye on the grid, because honestly, that is where the real story of AI is going to be decided.